I'd like to welcome all of you to the Northeastern University Charlotte campus. My name is Cheryl Richards, and I have the pleasure of serving as the CEO and Regional Dean of the campus here in Charlotte. Many of you may not know that we opened our doors just a little over 9 months ago here, but the university itself is over a century old, based out of Boston. And we're most known for our signature experiential education, which means that we look at the world as our laboratory and as our classrooms. We don't keep them within the walls. And I think today's session is an extension of how we think about education. It was really important for us here on this campus to bring thought leadership to the region and to start having a dialogue around specific topics that are of importance to the Charlotte area. Obviously, transit is one of those topics. A lot of publicity lately and a lot of dialogue lately around transportation and the role of the federal government in local transportation policy. You'll see that as we continue this series, we'll start to explore other topics like innovation and entrepreneurship, small business. We, in January, have our superintendent, Heath Morrison, coming to have a dialogue around education. And then we'll have additional conversations around healthcare, global markets, and the list goes on. So we invite you to check back frequently to see who we'll be bringing in next time, because I can guarantee you they will hold the same standard that these fine folks do here for us today. So let me take one moment and do brief introductions for you of our discussion host today. Eric Spanberg will serve as our moderator. Many of you know Eric from the Charlotte Business Journal. He has covered topics that are of concern to the Charlotte area, from transportation to education, et cetera, has a wealth of experience, and we thank you, Eric, for moderating for us. This gentleman here needs very little introduction, and I kept your name tag back.
If you're over 35.
We are very pleased that former Governor Dukakis is on our faculty at Northeastern University, and he and Kitty are distinguished fellows of the Dukakis Center for Urban and Public Policy at the Center, and we are just delighted to have you back. I had a wonderful opportunity to dine with them during the DNC here. Fascinating individuals, both of them, and so thank you both for being here. What you may not know about former Governor Dukakis is that he was nominated by President Clinton for a 5-year term as the member of the board of directors for Amtrak, and then, as we all know, was the former Democratic nominee for president, but has a passion for transportation, a passion for healthcare, and so we're pleased to have you here. Thank you. And then my good friend Carolyn Flowers, who is the director of our public transit and CEO of CATS. And you've read in the paper that we were about this close to seeing Carolyn have opportunities that would have whisked her away to other areas, and we are very fortunate that she has a passion for transportation in the Charlotte region, and she quickly said to everyone, I am not interested in leaving, I'm interested in solving the issues that we have here in our own region. So we are very appreciative for that, and very appreciative for the thought leadership that you'll bring to this dialogue today. Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Let me know if you can't hear me, although usually I'm pretty noisy. I'm not going to talk much because y'all have to hear me all the time. I am wondering what it is about Massachusetts governors and running for president, though.
Question is, can we win?
But
I won't get into that, except to say.
Obviously, we're going to call on you, Governor, for some national perspective. And Carolyn, you know all the local stuff, and you've heard all my questions already anyway. So if you don't mind, maybe Governor Dukakis, you could start us off with just what you're seeing in terms of transit policy and funding at a federal level right now, and where you think it's headed.
Well, let me try to be as brief as I can. And by the way, great to be back, and great to be back with Kitty, who just looks more beautiful every day. I introduced her. We're about to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary next year.
Congratulations.
And I keep introducing her as the best looking Medicare recipient in America. And she is. And to be on the same platform with Carolyn, interesting connection here, folks. While I love teaching at Northeastern, I've been there ever since I left the governor's office, which is now well over 20 years. And I do a lot of teaching. People say to me, you know, what course do you teach? I said, 6 of them, you know. But I love teaching these kids, especially the the students that I have who want to do public service. And as Cheryl said, we have what we call the co-op program where our kids, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but our kids go 5 years, not 4. First year is all academic, and then they start rotating. 6 months work, 6 months study, 6 months work, 6 months study. These are paid jobs related to their majors. Got a full-time co-op department. And it's not only a fabulous way to go to school. This past year, Northeastern University had 50,000 applicants for admission to the freshman class, 2,800 spots, the highest of any non-public university in America. Now, part of that's Boston, but a lot of it's co-op. A lot of it is this, and our kids, for the most part, especially the health-related students, are getting jobs, folks, even in a soft economy. Why? Because they work for employers, get a chance to see them in action, like them, hire 'em. And it's just terrific. But in the wintertime, difficult though it is, Kitty and I drag ourselves out to UCLA. I mean, it's a terrible burden. Somebody's got to do it. And so I teach out there. This good woman, not only is a graduate of UCLA, but worked for the Metropolitan Transit System under one of the finest transit managers and public managers I've ever known. A wonderful guy named John Cato, before she came to you guys. So it's great to be back again. We rode your light rail line together 2 years ago, personally escorted by Carolyn. This is a puzzling time in U.S. transportation policy history. And frankly, folks, I don't quite understand it. Investing in transit, and I hope I won't detour too much by saying intercity rail as well, because that's very important to you folks here. D.C. to Atlanta ought to be every bit as much an important high-speed corridor as Boston to D.C. And you have a huge stake in national policy in that sense, because it's the federal government and Amtrak specifically, which, by the way, has been setting records for ridership consistently now, every month and every year, just hit 30 million passengers. Despite a lot of knocking around, it's doing a remarkably good job with very little investment in it in terms of modern equipment and all that kind of stuff. But intercity rail for you folks, I think, is very much a part of the whole rail-based transit situation. In any event, I was, as you heard, I was on the Amtrak board for 5 years, and as governor for 12, was a huge advocate of this, and I was the guy, you know, I rode the streetcar. It was not an act, folks. I've been riding it since I was 5. Kitty and I have been, riding the T since the time we were little. And there was always strong bipartisan support, Eric, for investing in transit and rail. And if you check the polls, lots and lots of public support. People want this. But something's happened, and I don't say this in a partisan sense because I'm really very troubled by it. We got a fairly new bunch of folks coming into the House of Representatives in 2010. And all of a sudden, they're anti-rail and anti-transit. Now look, who was the president who was most responsible for the Transcontinental Railroad? If you get this right, you don't have to take the final.
It was a Republican.
It was a Republican. Abraham Lincoln, right in the middle of the Civil War, and a very bad time in the middle of the Civil War, Eric, right?
Correct.
At least from the standpoint of us guys up north. Lincoln, who had been a railroad lawyer, among other things, said, we're going to build that thing. But this is something you probably don't know, and I just discovered the other day. It was in the Republican platform of 1860, a commitment to the Transcontinental Railroad. And I served on an Amtrak board appointed by Bill Clinton with 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, 3 of the best Republicans I've ever worked with, including Tommy Thompson. And we had strong bipartisan support in the Congress, across the board. All of a sudden, we got this new group here, who opposed the president's proposals for high-speed rail, don't seem to want to invest much at all in transit, at a time when I think we need those investments for 2 reasons. First, look at urban congestion and ask yourself, how are you going to deal with it? You got it, we got it, everybody's got it. And secondly, what a time to do the investing. The cost of money is practically zero. There are people out there looking for work. You got contractors that are hungry and bidding low. There will never be a better time in our lifetimes to invest in inner city rail and metropolitan transit. And whatever you think of the stimulus package, and I think we needed it, but I had some problems with it. One of the problems was there wasn't enough infrastructure money. I thought a lot more of the stimulus package should have been infrastructure and with a heavy emphasis on urban transportation. But one of the problems was that the states weren't ready for it. Even when they got the money, they couldn't produce. And we should always be ready, in my opinion. On-the-shelf projects ready to go in the event the economy drops. And what better investment than urban and metropolitan transit? So I hope once the election is behind us, that this is at least one policy area where Democrats and Republicans can sit down together, agree that this is important, and come up with some serious money. Now, where should it come from? And I'll quickly conclude with this. Look, I want this country to have a strong defense and strong national security policy. I spent 16 months of my life 7 miles from the DMZ in South Korea. In fact, took Kitty back there a year ago just to show her where her husband had spent some time. And incidentally, came back a little embarrassed, folks. The best airport in the world, a terrific transit system in Seoul, not one but two high-speed rail lines, 180 miles an hour to the southeast and the southwest. And we couldn't find where my unit was because there was a huge commuter rail station in Munsan, Korea, that did nothing but rice paddies when I left it. But you know, this just, we've got a defense budget which increasingly seems to be disconnected from the threat we face. Super carriers aren't going to do much when it comes to dealing with Al-Qaeda. Can we agree? Or for that matter, F-35s. We were spending $10 billion a month in Iraq. $10 billion a year would do wonders for transit city rail. Huh?
More than use that. We could build out everything.
837 American bases, 150 countries. How about 400? You know, could we take 437, close them down, and take that money and invest it in our cities, and more specifically in the kinds of investments that you want to make here and we want to make back in Boston and so on and so forth. So, and by the way, much bigger payoff from a job standpoint. And in terms of domestic economy, needless to say, if we were spending that money here at home and not out in East Overshoe someplace. So nobody's going to tell me that we don't have the resources to do this and do it in a way which is far more helpful in terms of getting this economy of ours back on track. So in any event, a little too long, but that's my sense of things. And I just, somehow I hope we certainly have public support, Eric. I don't think there's any question about it. So I hope we can get these two parties back together again after the election and really get serious about some of the things we agree on. And I'd like to think most Americans agree on this.
Now, earlier today, Carolyn and I were both in a meeting where transit was very much on the menu in terms of funding, and the streetcar issue came up, and Mayor Fox again mentioned that the light rail extension that is likely to start next year could be the last one that's funded with 75% of the money coming from outside of Charlotte and a 25% match locally. That's all a long way of asking you, Carolyn, how do you start to make sense of what Governor Dukakis is talking about with all of these new dynamics in terms of federal funding and the willingness to fund projects?
Well, I think what he has painted the picture of is basically constraints and restraints that we're under. And we have gone back and looked at our financial plan, and what we've said is that we can't do everything that we had originally envisioned. And so we only have funding to do so much right now. And what we've seen from the federal sources is that you can't count on that now as a staple source of funding. We've seen that they've changed the model of reauthorization. They're very short periods now, 2 years versus maybe 7 or 8 years that they had in the past. When you had longer reauthorization bills, you could count on a stable source of financing for capital projects. What we've also seen is the threat of sequestration, which will reduce funding for the New Starts program, which is the source of capital construction for light rail, streetcar, bus rapid transit projects. And what we are also seeing too is that there's a change in the model from what they did in the past with earmarks, and now they're competitive grants. So what we've had to do is be able to demonstrate that what we're doing with our projects are going to generate economic development, put us in a environment where we can compete against other cities. And so as the pot dwindles, it's going to be more competitive, and we're going to see less and less cities be able to get into the process to get these type of projects. And there was a time where capital projects were funded at 80%. Now they're funded at 50%. Who's to say that they'll be funded at less, and that the burden will be shifted to the local governments to come up with the funding?
Governor, can you give us a couple of thoughts on, because I don't think Charlotte is very different from a lot of other places. I think everywhere you go, there is a lot of talk about the importance of transit for a number of reasons.
You bet.
People seem to want more of it. The issue is always money. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the potential innovative financing strategies might be that are out there, or are there any?
Eric, it's not that, look, I understand, Carolyn, and all of you are dealing with the reality. I just think it's not the reality we ought to be working for. This is important. It's an investment. I mean, the whole point of investing in infrastructure when the economy's down is not just to put people to work, though it puts people to work. It's to build a foundation for the next chapter of economic growth. I mean, this isn't picking up sticks, folks. This is not making work. This is not make work. This is serious stuff. And this is the time to do it in the most cost-effective way. You're probably more up on the latest twist in all of this than I am, but I suspect highway projects are getting a higher percentage from the feds than transit. Why is that? Why should there be any difference? I mean, if the highway projects are getting 80%, the transit projects ought to get 80%. And folks, we're putting about $50 billion, this is just federal dollars, $50 billion federal dollars a year into highways, putting about $16 billion into aviation and airlines. Amtrak gets about $1.4 billion for a national rail passenger system, just to give you some sense. And transit, where are we now, Carol? Maybe $8 or $9 billion max?
Yeah.
I mean, just compare, look at those numbers. So, my view, don't want to sound bullheaded, but I guess I am. My view is that that we ought to, and there's no reason why cities, counties, states shouldn't be in Washington fighting like crazy for this. We should be fighting hard, first to get parity, if you will, between and among various transportation projects. I mean, why should the feds contribute more to a highway than a transit system, particularly these days? Might be the other way around. And secondly, we have the resources. I mean, as I said, nobody's going to tell me that this country can't put some significant investment in this kind of thing. So, rather than nickel and diming ourselves to death at the local level, trying to get the sales tax up 0.5 point and all that kind of stuff, which, by the way, is not good policy at this point. And some cities have done it. I mean, Los Angeles, amazingly, in the middle of a recession, by better than 2/3 voted to increase the sales tax, earmarked for transportation. And took a lot of work. The mayor deserves a lot of credit for this. But the federal government ought to be playing a very important role in this for all of the reasons that I've suggested. And that means, I think, that we've got to build a strong coalition nationally to go to Washington and insist that this be an essential part of the country's investment policy. And I don't think there shouldn't be any ideological argument about whether or not government has to build infrastructure. I mean, who's going to build it if the government doesn't, or at least be responsible for it? I mean, that's one thing I think most Americans agree government has to do. So, so I think we've got to fight very hard so that we don't end up getting nickel and dime, and we're all kind of scratching around trying to patch stuff together here. Sure, there ought to be some local contribution, but this should be part, in my judgment, of a strong, comprehensive national investment policy, which emphasizes infrastructure.
Carolyn, since you've been both in California and now in North Carolina for a few years, I'm wondering what difference, if any, do you see between the states and particularly the congressional delegations in terms of support for major transit projects, since the national piece is suffering right now?
Well, I believe there is more support in California. What I think I see more of a difference is that in California, there's more of an urban agenda. And in North Carolina, Charlotte is just one of the 3 major urban areas in the state. And so there are a lot more of the rural issues that are being addressed on the state level than, I would say, the urban issues. I think that we have to fight very hard here on the urban level to get funding and to sustain the funding. And I think it was less of a fight in a place like California. And the levels of congestion there are just way, way over. You've gone to the other side of the moon in terms of levels of congestion. And when people's lives are basically controlled by congestion, you're going to have a different dynamic. And in California, basically, if you live anywhere near the coast, your life is going to be controlled by trying to get around in congested areas. So.
You have no idea, folks, how many hours in the day are consumed in California trying to figure out, will we get there, and if so,
when?
And it can drive you out of your mind. I mean, I remember, you'd appreciate this because you come from there. I remember we were invited to dinner by very dear friends in Pasadena, and it was a Saturday evening. Little naive me. I mean, I figure, back in the Boston area, yeah, we got some congestion, but Saturday night, you can drive anywhere, right? I mean, easy.
Saturday
1 hour
night is
and
worse.
35 minutes later, we completed the 12-mile journey
Yep.
from the Westwood section of Los Angeles to Pasadena. I almost turned around and went home, honest to God. So,
By home, you mean Boston?
no. Back to Westwood, which is lovely. So you can understand why people voted for that half-cent increase in the sales tax. But it's not, look, the high-speed rail system is a controversial issue in California.
Yeah.
Now, from my standpoint, how can you drive on those freeways and not conclude that the state desperately needs a first-class, modern, 200-mile-an-hour rail system that will get you from Los Angeles to San Francisco in 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is what happens in a lot of the rest of the world these days, folks. But it's not without controversy. So far, apparently,
I
it's going to
think
move, but
the
it's
controversy is where they want to start it.
But
in the middle of the state.
yeah, they ought to build that. They ought to connect Bakersfield and Los Angeles first, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
But there's controversy. On the other hand, it was pretty remarkable. Right in the middle of a recession, people vote to tax themselves for mostly public transportation. Pretty impressive.
One thing both of y'all have touched on that I'd like you to talk about a little bit is it's interesting when we have these debates, and we have them all the time, about roads and transit. It seems that roads are held to a different standard. Transit, a lot of the fight, and this is rare, Carolyn's nodding her head as I'm speaking, it's never happened before. But transit, the issue always comes down to, does it make money? Do we have to subsidize it? Things like that. Roads, we really don't hear nearly as much talk about what it costs to maintain roads, to build new roads. Can you just talk a little bit about why we have that dichotomy in terms of analyzing this?
I think we're still in the Eisenhower era. You know, when people look at transit, they always talk about the subsidies, and somehow they never feel that roads are subsidized, but they are. I mean, they're subsidized through gas taxes.
Big time.
Yeah, so that fact seems to just disappear, vaporize, and but you know, it's not the case. So when we're always asked, are you making money on transit? And basically, fare box doesn't cover the cost, so the rest of it is subsidized. But on roads, no one seems to think about that because there's quote unquote no fare box unless you have a toll road. And so only when you bring in a toll road do people start thinking about what the cost is because they're paying something at that time. But otherwise, it's just something that everyone takes for granted in this country as being free. But there is a cost that's associated with it that is never, ever discussed.
Every mode of transportation loses money by definition. And highways, substantially more than transit in most cases. I mean, highways, gasoline tax is not paying its way these days, folks.
Nope.
If that's the way you want to finance highways. So Carolyn's absolutely right, Eric. There's this strange dichotomy in people's minds. You know, my predecessor as governor wants to eliminate subsidies for Amtrak, but what about the billions that we're using to subsidize highways and airports? Nobody talks about that, right? That's a legitimate, thoughtful public expenditure. And by the way, Amtrak, interesting enough, has, I think, the highest fare box recovery rate of any railroad in the world. 85% of Amtrak's costs are being paid for by ticket prices, which is remarkable as these things go. So it's a strange way of thinking of this, but it means that those of us who are advocates for what we're talking about here have got to do a better job, Eric, I think, than we've been doing of helping people to understand that every one of these transportation modes is getting huge amounts of federal money, and the highways and the airports substantially more than transit and rail.
I mean, I wonder just from watching and reporting on this whether part of the problem is the approach that sometimes is taken by transit advocates, which is a lot of times I think they feel pressured to make the business case, and the straight business case is very, I mean, it's impossible to make because no one makes money on trains, buses, and things like that. So I wonder, you know, what kinds of things do you think would be more effective in terms of shifting the conversation if you're an advocate for transit?
Well, one of them is, and I'm sure you've talked about this a lot, Carolyn, is the economic impact of transit investment. I mean, the city of Boston today, folks, is awesome, as the kids say. And I say that as somebody who grew up in the town when it was dirty, declining, racist, anti-Semitic, you name it. Now, what happened? Well, we had a huge battle, Eric, in the 50s and 60s and early 70s over whether or not we would build something called the Master Highway Plan in, on, and over the city of Boston, basically a California-style freeway system for Boston. And I was one of the guys that led the fight against it at a time when the T, as we call the MBTA, was a basket case. You know, terrible administration, full of political patronage. You know, I took the streetcar to work, it broke down 3 days out of 5. I'm not kidding you. It was horrible. And we finally won the battle, and then with the help of a sainted man named Thomas P. O'Neill, Jr., who you will recall became the Speaker of the House, we became the first state in the country to be permitted to use its interstate highway money, which we didn't want, for public transportation. It had never been done before. Remember, you couldn't bust the Highway Trust Fund, Carolyn? Right? It was gasoline tax money. It had to be used for highways. We were the first state that were able to break out of that. And I got elected. And basically had $3 billion highway dollars that we could invest in the transit system. And we did. We did it. Acquired the entire commuter rail system from the private railroads that didn't want it anymore. Completely modernized it. Modernized every single station. Extended transit out in all kinds of directions. And the reason Boston today is arguably one of the healthiest cities in America is because, first, we made that decision, and secondly, with the help of the feds And those highway dollars, now turned into transit dollars, we're able to invest in this transit system. And today, no developer in or around Boston will make a decision to invest in a development without asking himself or herself the question, how close am I to the T? In fact, traffic counts are dropping in Boston, if you can believe it, and parking requirements have been reduced by the city when you build a building, on the theory that you can go anywhere you want at the T, and if you're 65 and older, you do it for 60 cents. The best value in America. We all have our senior T pass. So today, I mean, Boston's just booming with development. I mean, there are cranes all over the place. And then, of course, we got this great university community, which is investing heavily. Yeah. And I never knew, Cheryl, how well I had done by Northeastern when it came to transit as governor until I got there. We have a major transit station, which just happens to be right smack in the middle of the campus. And you can be in downtown Boston in 10 minutes from Northeastern.
2 stations.
Huh?
Into Amtrak and 2 stations.
Into Amtrak and 2 stations, a high-speed rail to New York, and commuter rail to the Southwest. And then, if you want a streetcar, you go out in front of the campus and get on Huntington Avenue. I mean, it's just so the economic effects of, first, the decision to invest heavily in transit and not in roads, and secondly, to really do the job and do it well, have been enormous. And, you know, I just kind of walk around my capital city just open-mouthed, watching what's happening. It's just been remarkable, and investing in that transit system was absolutely the single most important thing we did, no question about it. And I assume you're seeing some development effects already for the rail, from the light rail, right?
We've been very successful on the south end with development, and we have some additional development coming up at the Remount area, Poindexter, and New Bern. So we're moving further south.
And the more comprehensive and the more extensive that transit system becomes, folks, the more you will have of that, with the kind of density and the kind of
and we hope to see the
development
same thing
efforts.
happen on the northeast corridor.
No question.
What kind of development are we seeing in those areas?
Basically, right now we're seeing multifamily, mixed use. That's the type of development that you saw on the south end. And so we're seeing now kind of the repetition of what has occurred in the south end moving further south. So there are 3 major developments that are going on right now, and then the potential of Scaly Bark happening in the near future will just continue that trend down the alignment.
Yeah, Tip O'Neill, that was Chris Matthews' boss, right?
Yes, yeah. That's right.
Do you have T stations or trolley stations near college campuses all over the city?
What the alignment that we're planning to build, the extension, will end on UNC Charlotte's campus. Right now, basically here in this hub, here near the Northeastern campus right here, this is near our transit hub. And we're also running right now this Gold Rush trolley bus that is going from Central Piedmont Community College over to the historic Black College, Johnson C. Smith. And we've seen our ridership probably increase by 30% when we extended our alignment. So serving the educational institutions, there's Johnson and Wells down the street, serving the educational institutions and having connectivity to the educational institutions is a major ridership driver for us.
Can I ask one other question? Do you have any problem with advertising on the cars?
This is a
I
bit,
didn't plant the question, I promise.
I know, but I want to tell you, as a person in recovery, I have very strong feelings about this because in the Boston area, we had huge numbers of alcoholic ads.
liquor rate.
Everywhere.
Well, it's a very timely discussion item.
And the guy who put them up is almost gone, which is
Well,
the more important piece.
You should know that Kitty went to the governor of the Commonwealth and said, Deval, you got to get rid of these things. No, we're still advertising on the T, don't get me wrong, but you know,
Well-
covering Kenmore Square Station with Absolute vodka ads did not.
We-
And by the way, they were all these liquor ads, Carolyn, seem to
Ads at our
appear,
stations.
especially in heavy university and college districts. Maybe it was a coincidence, right? But I don't think so. I don't think so. So
Well-
they're gone. But
We're just embarking on that, and so you know we definitely have, I would say, some criteria that we're implementing so that we will not be trying to encourage people to drink, especially students. So we're just embarking on that. It's a very timely discussion here in Charlotte.
I'm going to throw one more question at the two of you, and then we'll let anyone who has a question ask a
Right,
few questions.
terrific.
My last question is, when we talk about transit, and a lot of this conversation has been about trains, everyone thinks about trains first. I'm hoping the two of you can talk about how mass transit is really about more than just trains, and why that matters.
well, it is. What you want is a fully integrated system. And Carolyn mentioned this word connectivity. You want all of those modes to be fully integrated. So for example, for those of you familiar with the geography of Boston, South Station was an old railroad station, which when I became governor, had pigeons flying around on the eaves and water pouring through the ceiling. It was a disgrace. One of the great old railroad stations. Well, we completely restored it. But now, at South Station, you have rapid transit. You have the central bus terminal, which serves the entire New England region. You have something we call the Silver Line, which takes you in about 10 minutes to Logan International Airport. And you have commuter rail and high-speed rail from Boston to New York and DC, as well as within the metropolitan areas of commuter rail. So if you're coming up from New York on the Acela, on a high-speed train, get off at South Station, you walk 3 minutes to a transit connection, or you can go to the regional bus. And buses are a very important part of this, Eric. I mean, they're part of the system. What you want is, however, connectivity. That is, you want all of these features of the system to be fully integrated in a way that makes it unnecessary for folks to, you know, rent a car or something, because there's a gap between. We still have, you know, a gap between North and South Station, which is ridiculous. It's 1 mile. We ought to tunnel under the darn thing and connect the two. It takes 60,000 cars off the road.
Another time
and pay for itself. And pay for itself. But that fully integrated system, which includes all aspects of transit. We have something called a ride. I don't know where you have this, which is for disabled people.
Yes, we do.
Costs us a lot of money, but it's an important part of making it possible for people with severe disabilities to achieve a high degree of mobility and to enjoy our city and our state. And I assume you
Yes, we do.
work on these issues
Carolyn,
also.
talk about, you've got a few buses in your state too that you have to look after, not just trains. So can you talk a little bit about
Well,
how you balance all that?
I believe that what you have to look at, as he said, is a fully integrated system. And you have to look at the geography that you have to cover. And rail is not the toolbox solution to all of your transit needs. Your bus system is your backbone. And the bus system offers flexibility because you can change your route, modify your route. When you lay track, that is it. That track is there for 100+ years. So you have to have different modes in the toolbox to provide a system. And bus is the backbone service that you build off of, and then you integrate other modes on top of that so that you have a fully integrated network when you've completed your vision.
I mean, for example, I spend most of my time on rail-based transit. But if I want to go see my favorite Greek barber in Harvard Square, you know, I walk 4 blocks up to the 66 bus on Harvard Street, and I'm in Harvard Square in 20 minutes. So, and it's fine. It's terrific. So that's what you really want.
Great. Let's see if we have a few questions in the room. We do. Start here.
I'm June Blotnick with Clean Air Carolina, and I totally agree with you about building a national coalition for transit. But in this region, one of the fastest growing in the country, we definitely need a local regional coalition. We've just hit a lot of roadblocks trying to get the commuter rail to go north. And when we were trying to get the sales tax passed, we did have a coalition at that time. We had the Chamber of Commerce working with the Sierra Club, you know, so we had,
Yep.
it really did bring all sides together. What's going on in this region now, though, is we've got the Chamber supporting 2 major bypasses outside of Charlotte that are upwards of $700 million. So that's more roads. So we need to find a way to prioritize a multimodal transportation system so we don't need those bypasses. So just any comments, I mean, our organization's happy to step up and try to do it, but we need cheerleaders for transit here. And I don't think we've got it right now.
I think the question is, in essence, do you fight roads or do you say we need both? And I'm talking from a political strategy position.
Well, in our case, we fought them. We basically said, look, this is crazy. We've seen what Robert Moses has done to New York City. We did. Do we want that for Boston? On the other hand, at that time, the entire establishment, so you gotta build the highways, you gotta build the highways. This is even some of my friends in the planning field. And I said, I don't think so. And I had 2 experiences. One in 1960, I and one of my buddies took the bar exam. We had just finished law school. We went out to see our hero, Jack Kennedy, get nominated in Los Angeles. It was a great convention, but I couldn't wait to get out of Los Angeles. It was obvious already that the freeways weren't working, and it was like living in a toxic stew. I'm serious, folks. You couldn't walk down the street without your eyes burning, right?
Right.
You know, it was
And your head
horrible.
hurting.
And the highways, the freeways weren't working, even then. And then secondly, some of you old enough to remember this may recall that I was the moderator of a public affairs debate program called The Advocates on PBS. And we did a series of programs with Swedish television in Stockholm. And unfortunately, Kitty's mother had just been diagnosed with cancer, so we had to cancel her. So I'm sitting wandering around Stockholm doing television, but I had a couple of days. And I just spent some time in that city. Wow. They had a great transit system. There were no superhighways bisecting the city. It looked great, and it worked. That had a profound effect on me, let me tell you. I came back to Boston, I said, hey, Dukakis, maybe you're not crazy. Maybe, and in point of fact, we essentially fought and stopped any further highway construction, except for some guy from New York said to me, that big ditch, he said, what? The big dig. Which quite frankly doesn't add much capacity. What we did was to get that horrible overhead highway out of there and reconnect the city with its waterfront, and it's gorgeous now, and the thing is underground. But just invested heavily in a transit system which now serves us, you know, exceedingly well, and has had the effect of reuniting the city, stimulating unbelievable amounts of investment in the city. And not only that, but adding to the safety of the city. You know, a city that's lived in is a safe city. A city that's abandoned at 5 o'clock in the afternoon is an unsafe city. You can go down to downtown Boston on a Saturday night, there are 250,000 people walking around having a good time. So, now, look, are there some highway projects that might be, well, you all have to make that decision. But I think we're kidding ourselves, folks, if we think that additional highway capacity is going to relieve congestion. You know, there's something called induced demand. You build a highway and they will come. And you end up solving nothing and spending a ton of money. I mean, $700 million. I mean, think about it. So, but you got to make the case. You got to make the case strongly, and even in those days, you know, the Chamber of Commerce was all for the highways and all this kind of stuff. It's like tearing down Fenway Park. I mean, they all were for tearing down Fenway Park.
I might do it this year.
They may fire the manager, but they're not going to tear down Fenway Park. But you know, we were in a kind of destructive mode. I mean, it was just, you know, the cities would have built highways through. And fortunately these days, but I don't know how many of you saw, there was a piece in the New York Times just yesterday about Louisville. They've just kind of covered that place with concrete spaghetti. I mean, you can't even get to the river. And it's sad, because Louisville has a lot of history to it, and now they're talking about building another super highway through the place. So, and I don't have to tell you, if you're interested in environmental stuff, I mean, this is not adding to, you know, clean air and stuff. But I think it's, you know, I'm a great believer in trying to build consensus, sitting people down together, thinking through these issues, and then seeing if you can get some.
Now, to the governor's point, federal clean air standards, and particularly here in Charlotte, where we're bumping up towards the clean air standards caps in place for highway funds, will that cause a statutory shift to transit? Is that something that logically follows, or is that just a political point to where dollars flow instead towards road projects because we're hitting those caps in air quality? How does that work from a political perspective and just a statutory perspective?
Well, we bump up against those standards all summer long. But I haven't seen that that's really changed the direction here. So I would think it's more political. And as she said, the will to deal with those issues and the will to shift the funding to deal with those issues.
And look, you've got a beautiful city here, folks. I mean, I'm not blowing smoke at you. It's a lovely, lovely city. And it seems to me as you look forward, I mean, you want to make these investments in a way that will enhance the beauty and the attractiveness of really what is a very special community. And you got to think about this.
To that point, I think one of the things that the business community in Charlotte says is that we like to have lessons learned from other cities. So we traveled to Boston, we saw the Big Dig, we saw what the value of that was. We have also said we don't want to become an Atlanta. And much of that is because of just the congestion that's in there. From your vantage point, both of you, what are the tangible things that we can do as citizens to not become Atlanta, to support transit?
Invest, invest, invest now.
And don't build any more highways. When I was nominated for the presidency in 1988 in Atlanta, Kitty and I were in one of the hotels up on the top floor. Incidentally, I thought Clinton did a better job of nominating Obama than he did with me.
I was thinking it, but I wasn't going to say it.
Even though his speech for me was actually 15 minutes shorter. You know, we're very close, and I asked him to nominate me, needless to say. And I don't know how many of you remember this, but when Clinton asked for the presidency in the fall of '91, he went on Johnny Carson, and Carson said, "Why are you running?" He said, "Because I want to finish my speech for Dukakis." But we're on whatever the top floor was, looking down. And at that time, Eric, I think the highway right through the city was maybe 6 lanes. And they were widening it to 16.
Yeah, it is.
And I looked down, Carolyn, and I said, "Forgive them, Father. They know not what they are doing." And I remember turning to Kitty and saying, I give them 3 years before this thing is bumper to bumper. And I think in 2.5 it was bumper to bumper. I mean, you cannot build your way out of this with highways, folks. And I thought it was kind of sad. I know they did have a broad coalition, and they still lost the vote. So I guess people in Atlanta are just going to sit there stewing.
Yeah, what do you take from that? Because Carolyn and I talked about that this summer. I mean, you had a Republican governor, a Democratic mayor, you had the business community. I mean, all the powers.
Everybody
that
with
be.
it, yeah.
And as you say, it's a parking lot. We all know it's a parking lot. What do we take away from that? Is that a local case, or do you think that's indicative of how people are thinking around the country?
I think Atlanta has a set of its own issues. You know, there's they had trying to coordinate 10 counties. There's also a lot of distrust amongst those counties. There's not a lot of coordination. The transit system there is viewed as an urban system. Once again, it's an urban system.
For those folks, right?
For those folks.
Yeah.
And so the transit system is there's a wall between the transit system and all the surrounding counties. The other counties don't want transit to come out there. And so I think that it was a very difficult situation to try to coordinate 10 counties and get them on the same page. And I think a lot of it also was the timing of everyone getting involved. You talked about the coalition, but all of the coalition didn't get in there at the same time. They didn't have the Sierra Club on with them. So I think it was the way that it was coordinated that also had an impact on it.
It's an exception nationally, because with the possible exception of Kansas City, which was another one of these strange local political situations, every one of these tax-raising referenda for public transit has passed in the United States. It's really very interesting, including in, the Karl Lovis capital of the world, allegedly Los Angeles, California. This is kind of an exception. Now, we also have another advantage, I think, Carolyn, in Massachusetts. The governor runs the transit system. The governor runs the transit system. Now, it covers eastern Massachusetts. So decisions about major highways and transit are made in the same place. It does make a difference. Now, it puts a lot of responsibility on whoever happens to be in the governor's office, but it makes it a lot easier than when you have I assume that Atlanta's got a regional board of some kind with lots of actors and all that kind of stuff. That makes it more difficult. But that loss was a rare exception to what has been a long string of positive votes for tax raising for transit all over the country.
Let's get a couple more questions.
Hi, I'm Shannon Binns. I'm with a local nonprofit called Sustain Charlotte, and it seems to me that one of the things that's missing from the debate around transit is looking at not just, we look a lot at the cost of investing, but we don't often talk about the cost savings of transit. Back in 2010, the Texas Transportation Institute said that in Charlotte, growing congestion is costing us $525 million a year in terms of wasted gas and lost time, which worked out to about $876 per person in this region. I think it's probably gone up since 2010. So, are you seeing that as well nationally, that the conversation doesn't look at all of the costs associated with driving that could be saved by investing in transit?
Well, Carolyn kind of put her finger on it. There's this weird distinction between transit and other forms of transportation. It's supposed to pay for itself, but the highways and the airports are not supposed to pay for themselves, and they don't, big time. We just got to change the dialogue. I mean, we just got to help people to try to understand that those are costs that they're incurring. And you got to do that all the time, don't you?
Yep, I do.
Yeah.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to something you made a comment, both of you made comments on earlier, and that's economic development. And ultimately, that's what should drive all the decision-making about whether you do transit or whether you improve your highways, because transit moves people, but you still have to have a great connector to move goods and services, because companies, manufacturers, distribution points will come if you've got a network to move the tractor trailers. You can't really do that with
Right.
transit. So and having all in the same room, but do you see the possibility of driving the conversation to a total system that can be all about economic development and the results of that, and showing that value, because then it will pay for itself if you put that economic picture into it. I mean, how is that being talked about, or is it
Well,
regional?
I think it is being talked about on a regional basis here. The Charlotte Regional, yeah. So there is a group here that basically coalesces that issue for the entire region, and so I think there's been probably in Charlotte a broader discussion than in other places, but I think the discussion probably needs to continue to be escalated, and we need to take other resources and bring them in there. They're doing it to sell, businesses to move here. So they're taking all of those aspects and saying, this is what makes Charlotte, more competitive than other places. And it's working for us, but it could work better. But then we also have to plan for it too. So I think, that's taking that and inserting some other voices into that discussion.
Of course, to the extent that transit decongests your highways, that helps the truckers, because they're stuck in these traffic jams all day long as well. So it seems to me, bring the trucking industry into this as an advocate for the kind of thing we're talking about could be helpful.
I was just going to add, talent recruitment is also very, very important. And I've got a creative business, and we bring young people into town, and they're shocked by the fact we don't have more light rail. And so I know as we continue to need to, attract business, but talent also, and there's an expectation from young people that, the transportation will be here.
And that seems to be happening all over the country, isn't it? In city after city after city. The kids want to be in a place that's, they want to be, they want to walk, they want to be, they want to be in a lively kind of city center, they want to be able to live fairly close to that. It's really very interesting.
Very good. One last question.
It wasn't a question, it's a comment. I just submitted a co-op application today, and I put that housing would be located near our light rail line for a clean commute. So I have to help them find it.
I tell you,
Because I know they're used to it, and they're gonna want it.
these days back home, that's what they want to know. How far is it to walk to that transit stop? And now with new technology and these apps, you know more about this than I do, where you can take out your iPhone and for example, when it comes to a bus, Eric, know that
Next bus.
next bus is 3 minutes. You walk out of the house and get down. I mean, it's
You want to admit to everybody that you don't.
well, I don't. I just go to my transit stop and get on there.
And it's coming.
But with the kids, I mean, it's remarkable, and ridership just keeps going up and up and up, really. I mean, it's just, for a guy who was a bit of a rebel when it came to this, because believe me, the whole establishment, they got to build the highways, you got to build. It's such a great feeling to now see what's happened, folks. And it takes a while. Look, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's just remarkable just seeing what's going on in the city. And it has everything to do with, I'm sorry, with
I'd like to
decisions
make
made.
a plug that our ridership went up 6% last year.
And the more you expand the system, the more the ridership's going to go up.
So
Exponentially.
we have that piece of news. You endorsed Governor Romney.
That
We should,
that will never happen. But Obama is 30 points ahead of Romney in Massachusetts, which tells you something about the Commonwealth's view of our former governor. But anyway, that's a whole other
To
thing.
keep the peace, let's give Carolyn and Governor Dukakis a hand. And keep those tuition payments coming, and now I'll turn to you.
Thank you both so much. In the spirit of giving you something that will weight down your suitcase on the way back, our inaugural gift, and
thank
you may
you.
want to show that it's a nice globe that symbolizes our local leaders' global impact. You
Oh, thank
both
you.
have such an impact here locally on the things that we're doing, but around the world, and we can't thank you enough for your time and your insights in this.
Thank you all for coming.
We thank all of you for coming today. You've heard a couple plugs for our co-op program, and although we are doing graduate programs only at this campus, we are also open to expanding our co-op opportunities for our undergraduate and graduate students in the Charlotte region. So if you have an opportunity at your place of employment where you can provide one of these 6-month full-time opportunities for our students, please see any of our staff members, because we would happily engage you in that conversation. Please check back to our website frequently. We will have the information up for the next series. It's coming up again, Innovation and Entrepreneurship in October, and then Family Business and Succession Planning in November. So we hope you'll come back again. Please feel free to stay, mingle upstairs here, and take a tour of the campus. And if there's any questions we can answer, we're happy to do so. Appreciate you coming today.